Hello there, and welcome to The Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight's journey will take us into something you may have noticed, perhaps without ever giving it much thought. A small, quiet moment where time itself seems to hesitate. But before you settle in and get cozy, I'd love if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if you truly find these quiet explorations enjoyable. And when you're ready, leave a comment to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always such a joy to see all the places we gather from, each in our own little slice of time. Now feel free to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a soft background hum, and let's gently begin our journey into this strange and delicate corner of perception together. And if your mind begins to wander, that's perfectly fine. Let it drift. We'll still be here, quietly unfolding the story. There is a moment, so small that it almost disappears, that you may have experienced many times before. Perhaps you've just looked up at a clock, not for any urgent reason, just a casual glance. Maybe it's late at night and the room is quiet. Maybe the air feels still and your thoughts are moving slowly. Your eyes settle on the second hand. And for just an instant, it doesn't move. It seems to pause, suspended, as if time itself has taken a breath and forgotten to exhale. Then, almost as suddenly, it continues, tick, as if nothing unusual happened at all. But something did happen. That first moment, the one that felt longer than it should have been, wasn't quite real in the way you might think. It wasn't the clock slowing down. It wasn't time stretching itself. It was something far quieter, something happening inside you. And the curious thing is, it feels completely natural. So natural, in fact, that most people never question it. The world appears steady, continuous, reliable. But beneath that calm surface, your mind is doing something extraordinary. Because in reality, your eyes are not gently gliding from one point to another. They're jumping rapidly, abruptly, several times every second. Like a series of tiny leaps across the visual world. Yet you never see those jumps. You never notice the blur, the disorientation, the chaos that should come with such constant motion. Instead, what you experience is smooth, seamless, a quiet, stable world that never seems to break apart. And in order to give you that smoothness, your brain makes a small, invisible adjustment. When your eyes land on that clock, your mind doesn't simply begin seeing in that moment. It does something more subtle. It quietly reaches back, just a little, and fills in the gap. Like a storyteller who begins a sentence halfway through, then gently rewrites the beginning so it all feels complete. The result is that the very first moment you see feels longer than it truly was. Not dramatically, not enough to disrupt your day, but just enough to create that strange, lingering pause, that tiny illusion where the second hand seems to hesitate. It's not an error, it's a solution. Because without it, the world would feel unstable, flickering, disjointed. Every glance would come with a brief darkness, a missing piece, a subtle break in reality. So instead, your brain chooses continuity over precision. It chooses a world that feels whole, even if it means gently reshaping time itself. And this reshaping is so delicate that it goes unnoticed, like a seam hidden beneath fabric, or a quiet edit in a film you've watched 100 times without ever spotting the cut. You live inside that edited reality every moment of your life, every glance, every shift of attention, every time your eyes move from one place to another. And yet, for the most part, it feels effortless, unquestioned, until something draws your attention to it. A clock, a ticking hand, a quiet room. And suddenly, for just a brief second, You catch a glimpse of the machinery beneath, a small glitch in the flow of time. It doesn't last long, it never does. But it raises a gentle, unsettling question. If your mind can stretch a single moment, just enough for you to notice, then how much of what you call now is shaped in the same way? How much of time, as you feel it, is something being carefully assembled moment by moment just out of sight? It's a strange thought, but not an uncomfortable one. In fact, there's something almost peaceful about it, because it means that time, as you experience it, is not rigid, not mechanical, not entirely fixed. It is flexible, soft at the edges, capable of stretching, compressing, and quietly adapting to the needs of your perception. And that small, lingering second, the one that refused to move, is your first glimpse into that hidden flexibility, a doorway perhaps, into a deeper understanding of how your mind shapes the world you live in. As your thoughts begin to settle around this idea, you might start to notice something else, that your vision itself, the simple act of looking, is not quite as continuous as it feels, that between one point and the next something subtle is happening, something quick, almost too quick to notice, and yet it is happening constantly, like footsteps you never hear, but somehow always follow. And if we gently slow things down, just a little, we might begin to sense those hidden movements, not directly, not all at once, but in the same quiet way you noticed that lingering second, a small hint, a soft distortion, a suggestion that the world is not being seen in one smooth stream, but in a series of delicate invisible steps, and somewhere within those steps, time itself begins to shift. That small lingering second, the one that seemed to stretch just a little too far, has a name, not a dramatic one, not something that announces itself loudly, just a quiet, almost poetic word that scientists use to describe this delicate bending of time. They call it chronostasis. If you listen to it slowly, you can almost hear its meaning unfold. Chrono, from time, stasis, from stillness. Time, holding still. But of course, time itself hasn't paused. The clock has not hesitated. The universe continues steady and indifferent. It is your perception that lingers. And what makes this even more fascinating is that chronostasis isn't rare. It isn't unusual. It isn't a glitch in the sense of something broken. It is something your brain does intentionally, quietly, reliably, again and again every time your eyes move. Because beneath the smooth surface of your awareness, your eyes are constantly jumping from place to place, not drifting, not sliding, jumping. If you could somehow see your own vision from the outside, slowed down and magnified, it wouldn't look like a steady stream at all. It would look more like a sequence of snapshots, a series of quick, precise jumps, each one landing on a new point of interest, and between those jumps, there is a gap, a tiny gap, so small that you never notice it directly, but large enough that, without help, it would leave your experience of the world feeling fractured, disconnected, slightly broken. Imagine reading a sentence but with a brief blank space between each word, or watching a film where every cut to a new scene is preceded by a flicker of darkness. It wouldn't feel smooth, it wouldn't feel natural, so your brain does something remarkable. It hides the gap, not by ignoring it, but by gently rewriting it. When your eyes land on a new image, like that clock face, the brain doesn't simply start recording from that exact instant. Instead, it quietly stretches the beginning of that moment backward, just enough to cover the unseen transition, as if it's saying, this is where you've been looking all along, even though, just a fraction of a second earlier, you weren't. It's a bit like opening a book and beginning halfway down a page, only to have the first few lines softly filled in so the story feels complete, or like a video that skips forward ever so slightly and then subtly slows the next frame so you never notice the jump. The result is a seamless experience, a world that feels continuous even though it is being stitched together in real time, and that first second, the one that felt longer than it should, becomes a kind of side effect of this stitching process, a gentle ripple where the edges were smoothed. Now, there are two quiet ways to think about what your brain might be doing here. One possibility is that it is reaching backward, assigning the new image to a slightly earlier moment in time, almost like placing a bookmark a few pages before you actually arrived. Another possibility is that it is stretching the present itself, allowing the first moment you see to linger just a little longer than the ones that follow. Both ideas lead to the same experience, a moment that feels expanded, not dramatically, not in a way that disrupts your sense of reality, but enough to be noticed if you happen to be paying attention. And what's comforting is that this process isn't random, it's guided. Because your brain isn't just reacting to what you see, it is also predicting it. Before your eyes even finish their movement, your brain has already begun preparing for what it expects to find. Like turning your head toward a familiar voice before you fully heard the words. There's a kind of quiet anticipation at work, a soft guess about where things will be, how they will look, how they will continue. And when your eyes finally arrive, that prediction and the incoming image meet and are gently blended together. The difference between expectation and reality is smoothed over. The gap is filled, and time, for just a brief instant, is adjusted to make it all feel natural. It's not unlike a conversation where you already know what someone is about to say, and when they do say it, your mind slides effortlessly from anticipation into recognition. There is no pause, no awkward silence, just continuity. That continuity is what your brain is protecting, because from a deeper perspective, the world you experience is not just about accuracy, it's about stability. A perfectly accurate world, one that showed every tiny interruption, every blur, every gap, would feel chaotic, unsettling, difficult to navigate. So instead, your brain chooses a different path. It builds a version of reality that is calm, steady, and coherent, even if it means making small, invisible adjustments along the way. And chronostasis is one of those adjustments, a tiny moment where the system reveals itself, not fully, not in a way that breaks the illusion, but just enough for you to notice that something is happening beneath the surface, and once you begin to notice it, it becomes difficult to completely ignore, because it suggests something deeper, that what you experience as a continuous flow of time may actually be composed of many carefully arranged pieces, each one placed exactly where it needs to be so that the whole feels smooth, like tiles in a mosaic or notes in a melody. You don't hear the spaces between the notes, but they are there, and without them, the music would not feel the same. As this idea settles gently in your mind, you might begin to sense that the act of looking itself is far more active than it seems, that your eyes are not simply observing the world, but moving through it in quiet, precise steps. Steps that happen so quickly and so often that they disappear into the background of your awareness. And yet, they shape everything you see, everything you feel, every moment you experience. If we slow those steps down, even just a little, we might begin to glimpse the hidden rhythm beneath them, a rhythm of movement and stillness, of absence and presence, of moments that are not simply passing, but being gently arranged. And somewhere within that rhythm, time begins to take on a slightly different meaning, not as something fixed and flowing, but as something softly constructed. As this idea of time being gently shaped begins to settle, There's another quiet detail, even closer to your everyday experience, that slowly comes into view, and it begins with something so familiar that it almost disappears into the background of awareness. The simple act of looking. Right now, wherever your eyes happen to be resting, it might feel as though you're seeing everything at once, in a continuous, unbroken stream, as if your vision were like a calm river flowing steadily forward, never pausing, never skipping, always present. But beneath that smooth feeling, something far more dynamic is quietly taking place. Your eyes are moving. Not slowly, not gracefully, but in quick, precise jumps that happen several times every second, so quickly that they leave no trace in your conscious experience. These movements are small and effortless, and they happen whether you're aware of them or not, guiding your attention from one point to another like soft footsteps across a quiet floor. Imagine for a moment that you're reading a line of text. It may feel as though your gaze glides smoothly across the words, taking them in as a continuous flow of meaning, but in reality your eyes are not sliding across the page at all. Instead, they are leaping, stopping briefly on one cluster of letters, then jumping again to the next, and then again building the sentence piece by piece. Each stop is clear and stable. Each jump is invisible. And because those jumps are hidden, the entire process feels seamless, as though the words were simply there, waiting to be understood all at once. The same thing happens when you look around a room, or glance at a familiar face, or notice a small detail in the corner of your vision. Your eyes do not sweep across the world like a camera panning gently from side to side. They hop quietly, efficiently, constantly. These tiny movements are so fast that, if they were visible, the world would appear to flicker and smear with every shift of your gaze, as if the entire scene were being dragged across your field of view in a blur of motion. It would feel unstable, even disorienting, like trying to focus on something while riding over uneven ground. But you never experience that. Instead, what you perceive is steady, calm, and continuous, as though nothing ever interrupts the flow of sight. This is because your brain does something very kind for you. Each time your eyes make one of these rapid jumps, it quietly softens the transition, dimming the incoming visual information just enough that the movement itself never reaches your awareness. It is not a complete darkness, not something you could point to, but more like a gentle lowering of the volume, a brief hush that passes so quickly you never notice it. By the time your eyes land on a new point, the world is already stable again, waiting for you, as if it had always been there. And so, from your perspective, there are no gaps, no interruptions, just a smooth flowing experience of seeing. But if we slow this process down in our imagination, just enough to observe its hidden structure, a different picture begins to form. Instead of a continuous stream, vision becomes a sequence of moments, each one carefully placed after the last, like stepping stones across a river. You land on one stone, pause just long enough to take in what is there, and then, without noticing the leap itself, you arrive on the next, over and over again, so quickly that the stepping disappears, leaving only the feeling of motion. This is one of the quiet reasons why that lingering second on the clock feels so unusual, because for just a brief moment, you become aware of something that is usually hidden, something that normally blends into the background of perception. You catch a glimpse of the way your vision is assembled, not as a single, uninterrupted flow, but as a series of carefully arranged glimpses, each one clear in itself, yet separated by movements you never see. And this raises a soft, intriguing thought. If your vision is made of these tiny invisible steps, and if each step requires your brain to gently smooth over the transition, then perhaps what you experience as seeing is not a direct recording of the world, but a reconstruction, a quiet arrangement of moments designed to feel complete, not false, not misleading, but curated. Like a story that has been edited just enough to remove the pauses, the hesitations, the rough edges, leaving behind only the sense of continuity. And this is where the earlier idea of that stretched second begins to connect more deeply with the way your eyes move. Because every time your gaze shifts, there is a brief interval where you are not fully seeing the world in the usual way, and yet, when you arrive at the next point, it feels as though you have been there all along. That feeling of having always been looking is not entirely accurate, but it is incredibly useful because it keeps your experience stable, predictable, and easy to navigate. Without it, even simple tasks like reading, walking, or recognizing a face would feel fragmented, like trying to piece together a puzzle where the pieces keep disappearing and reappearing. Instead, your brain chooses to hide the gaps, to soften the transitions, and to present you with a version of the world that feels whole. And in doing so, it creates the conditions for subtle illusions like chronostasis to emerge, not as errors, but as gentle side effects of a system designed for coherence. As you sit with this idea, it may begin to feel less like a trick, and more like a quiet collaboration between your eyes and your mind, a partnership that allows you to move through the world with ease, even though the underlying process is far more complex than it appears. And somewhere within that complexity, within those rapid, unseen movements, time itself begins to take on a slightly different texture, one that is not entirely fixed, but shaped, moment by moment, by the way you look. As your attention rests here, you might begin to sense that there is something even more subtle happening during those quick shifts of the eyes, something beyond the movement itself, something that gently protects you from the blur and confusion that would otherwise fill your vision. A kind of quiet pause, hidden within the motion, where the world briefly softens before returning to clarity. And it is within that pause that the next layer of this story begins to unfold. As you continue to rest with the idea that your eyes move in quiet, invisible steps, something even more subtle begins to emerge, something that happens not when your gaze arrives, but in the brief instant while it is still in motion. Because those tiny jumps your eyes make, those quick movements from one point to another, are not as simple as they first seem. During each one, something curious happens. The world, for a fraction of a moment, becomes less visible, not completely dark, not something you would consciously notice, but gently muted, as though the brightness of the scene had been turned down just enough to soften the transition. It is a quiet pause, a soft interruption, hidden within the movement of your eyes. If that dimming did not occur, the experience of seeing would feel very different. Every time your eyes moved, the entire scene would smear across your vision, stretching and blurring in the direction of the motion. Straight lines would bend and streak. Faces would warp. The world would feel unstable, like looking through a window that is being dragged sideways again and again. Even a simple glance from one object to another would feel slightly disorienting, as if the ground beneath your perception was shifting with every step. But you never experience that. Instead, your mind gently protects you from it. As your eyes begin to move, the brain quietly lowers the clarity of incoming visual information, just enough that the motion itself fades into the background. It is not a complete silence, but more like a whisper replacing a sound, a soft hush that passes so quickly it leaves no memory behind. By the time your eyes arrive at their new position, the world has returned to full clarity, stable and coherent, as though nothing had happened at all. This process is often described in more technical language as a kind of visual suppression during eye movement, but you don't need the terminology to feel what it means. You can think of it as the brain briefly closing a curtain, just long enough to hide the transition and then opening it again once the scene is steady. A small kindness offered many times each second. And yet, what makes this even more interesting is that the curtain does not fall by accident. It is guided. Before your eyes even begin to move, your brain already knows that the movement is about to happen. Somewhere deep within its quiet coordination, it prepares for the shift, anticipating the blur that would otherwise follow and gently reducing the visual input in advance. It is not reacting after the fact. It is preparing ahead of time, like dimming the lights before a scene change in a theatre, so that the audience never sees the stagehands rearranging the set. And so, during each rapid movement of your eyes, there is a hidden moment where the visual world is softened, a moment you never consciously experience, yet one that plays a crucial role in keeping everything stable. If we imagine stretching that hidden moment out, slowing it down enough to observe, it would look like a brief fading of detail, a subtle smoothing of motion, followed by a return to clarity as the eyes come to rest. But because it happens so quickly, and because it is carefully timed, it disappears completely from your awareness. And this brings us back, in a gentle way, to that lingering second you noticed earlier. Because now we can begin to see that the illusion of the stopped clock does not come from nowhere. It grows out of this very process. Each time your eyes move, there is a small gap, moment where the visual world is softened, partially hidden from you. And when your gaze lands again, your brain does not simply resume as if nothing happened. It fills that gap, quietly, seamlessly. It takes the first clear image you see and allows it to extend just a little further, smoothing over the transition, covering the moment of silence that came before. And because of that extension, that gentle stretching of the first moment, the second hand on the clock appears to pause just for an instant before continuing its steady motion. What you're noticing is not time itself stopping. It is the boundary between one glance and the next being softened, reshaped, and gently hidden. And perhaps what is most remarkable is how consistent this process is. It happens not once, not occasionally, but constantly, every time your eyes shift their focus, whether you're reading, walking, or simply letting your gaze wander. It is a continuous act of quiet editing, happening beneath the surface of your awareness, ensuring that the world feels stable, even though it is being reconstructed moment by moment. There is a certain elegance to it, a sense that your perception is not passive, not simply receiving the world as it is, but actively shaping it into something that feels coherent and calm. And in that shaping, small distortions are allowed, tiny adjustments that make the whole experience smoother, more comfortable, easier to navigate. Chronostasis is one of those adjustments, a small ripple in the surface of time, revealing just a hint of the deeper process beneath. As you rest with this idea, you might begin to sense that the act of seeing is not just about light entering your eyes, but about the careful coordination of timing, expectation, and subtle suppression, all working together to create the illusion of continuity. And within that coordination there is a delicate balance. Too little suppression, and the world becomes chaotic, filled with blur and motion. Too much, and important details might be lost. But somehow, your brain finds the balance, moment after moment, allowing you to move through the world without ever noticing the complexity beneath. And yet, every now and then, in a quiet room with a simple clock, you catch a glimpse of it. A single second, stretched just enough to remind you that what feels continuous is, in fact, carefully composed, And as this realization settles, another gentle question begins to take shape. If your brain can hide motion so completely and fill the gaps so seamlessly, what else might it be quietly adjusting just beyond the edge of awareness? What other moments, what other sensations are being softened, extended, or rearranged so that your experience remains smooth? There is no need to answer that question all at once. It can simply rest there, like a thought drifting at the edge of sleep. Because the more you begin to notice these quiet adjustments, the more it becomes clear that perception is not a perfect mirror of the world, but something softer, something shaped. And within that shaping, time itself begins to feel a little less rigid, a little more fluid, as though each moment carries within it the possibility of being gently stretched, just enough to hold everything together. As that quiet moment of dimmed vision fades and your eyes come to rest once more, something almost invisible begins to unfold, not in the light that reaches your eyes, but in the way your mind arranges that light into experience. Because when your gaze settles on a new point, when the world returns to clarity after that brief hidden pause, your brain is faced with a small but important problem. There is a gap, a moment that was never fully seen, a fraction of time where visual information was softened, reduced, or simply not processed in the usual way. And yet, when you look at the world, it never feels as though anything is missing. There are no holes in your perception, no blank spaces where the world should have been. Instead, everything feels continuous, as though your awareness had been present the entire time. And so, your brain does something remarkably subtle. It fills the silence, not by inserting something entirely new, not by imagining a completely different scene, but by gently extending what comes next. The first clear image that arrives after your eyes stop moving is allowed to linger, to stretch backward just enough to cover the unseen moment before it. It is as if that image quietly says, "I have been here all along," even though it has only just appeared. This process is not something you can observe directly, but its effect is something you have already felt. It is that strange pause of the clock's second hand, that tiny hesitation that seems to last longer than it should. And now, with a little more understanding, it begins to feel less like a mystery and more like a soft correction, a gentle adjustment that keeps your experience whole. There are two quiet ways to imagine what your brain might be doing in this moment, and both lead to the same calm, seamless result. In one view, your brain reaches backward in time. It takes the first clear image you see after your eyes land and places it slightly earlier, as though it had already been there before your gaze arrived, like opening a window and convincing yourself the breeze had been there all along. This idea is sometimes described as a kind of backward assignment, where the moment of perception is gently shifted to overlap with the unseen gap. In another view, your brain does not move the moment backward, but instead stretches it forward. The first instant you perceive becomes just a little longer than it should be, expanding softly, like a breath held for an extra second. In this version, time itself feels slightly elastic, allowing the present moment to widen just enough to smooth over what came before. Whether your mind is quietly adjusting the past or gently extending the present, the effect is the same. Continuity. A world that feels unbroken, and perhaps what matters most is not which explanation is correct, but what they both reveal, that your perception of time is not fixed, not mechanical, but flexible, shaped moment by the needs of your awareness. Because if your brain were to leave that gap untouched, if it simply allowed the silence to remain, you would begin to notice something unsettling. Each movement of your eyes would come with a faint sense of interruption, a tiny flicker where the world briefly disappears and then returns. It would not take much for that flicker to become distracting, even disorienting, especially in a world where your eyes are constantly moving, adjusting, exploring. So instead, your brain chooses a softer path. It hides the gap not by erasing it completely, but by blending it into what follows, allowing the first clear moment to carry a little more weight, a little more duration than the ones that come after. And this is why that first second feels different. Not dramatically so, not enough to break your sense of time, but just enough to be noticed if you happen to be paying attention. The first moment after a shift of your gaze is not quite like the rest. It is slightly fuller, slightly longer, as if it has absorbed something extra. And in a way, it has. It carries within it the hidden silence of the movement that came before. As this idea settles, you might begin to notice that this quiet filling of gaps is not limited to vision alone. It is part of a broader pattern in the way your mind constructs experience. Whenever there is a break, a pause, or a moment of uncertainty, your brain leans toward continuity, gently smoothing the edges so that the whole remains coherent. It is like listening to music where the notes flow so naturally that you never think about the spaces between them, even though those spaces are essential. Or like watching a familiar scene unfold, where each moment feels connected to the last, even though, beneath the surface, there are countless tiny adjustments holding everything together. In this way, your perception is less like a camera recording every instant exactly as it happens, and more like a storyteller, weaving together fragments into a narrative that feels complete. And sometimes, if you are very still and very attentive, you can sense the stitching. Not clearly, not all at once, but in small, fleeting moments, like the pause of a second hand, or the feeling that a single instant has stretched just a little beyond its place. These moments are not errors, they are glimpses, soft reminders that the experience of time is something your mind actively shapes, rather than something it passively receives. And as you rest with that thought, another gentle layer begins to unfold. Because if your brain can quietly adjust a moment after your eyes move, if it can fill in the silence and smooth over the gaps, then it must also be doing something before your eyes even arrive, something anticipatory, something that prepares the way for what is about to be seen, a kind of quiet expectation, forming just ahead of perception, guiding it before it fully takes shape. And it is within that quiet anticipation that the next part of this story begins to emerge, where perception is not only filled in after the fact, but gently guided even before it begins. As the idea of your mind quietly filling in the gaps begins to settle, there is another layer, even more subtle, that slowly comes into view, and it is not about what happens after you look, but what happens just before. Because the truth is, your brain does not wait for the world to arrive, it prepares for it. Long before your eyes finish their quick, silent movement from one point to another, something within your mind is already beginning to form an expectation, a soft outline of what is about to be seen. It is not a detailed image, not a fully formed picture, but more like a quiet sense, a gentle anticipation that guides perception before it fully unfolds. Imagine turning your head toward a familiar voice in a quiet room. Even before the words become clear, even before the sound reaches its full shape, you already have a sense of who is speaking, where they are, and what might follow. There is a moment where recognition seems to arrive ahead of the signal itself, as though your mind has stepped slightly in front of reality, waiting for it to catch up. This is not imagination in the usual sense. It is not guessing wildly or inventing something out of nothing. It is a refined, deeply practiced form of prediction, built from countless past experiences, quietly guiding your perception so that the world feels immediate and coherent. In the context of your moving eyes, this predictive process becomes especially important, Each time your gaze shifts, your brain is faced with uncertainty. The visual scene is about to change, but is not yet fully arrived. There is a brief moment where the incoming information is incomplete, softened, or hidden, and yet your experience remains smooth. This smoothness is not accidental, it is prepared. Before your eyes land, your brain sends a quiet signal, a kind of internal message that says, "We're about to look here." And along with that message comes a prediction, a gentle expectation of what will likely appear at that new point of focus. It is like reaching out in the dark toward a familiar object, your hand already shaping itself to match what it expects to find. When the object is there, the movement feels natural, effortless, almost inevitable. When it is not, there is a brief moment of surprise, a small correction, and then the experience settles again. Your vision works in much the same way. Most of the time, the prediction is close enough to reality that the transition feels seamless. The new image arrives, and it fits neatly into the expectation that was already forming. The gap between anticipation and perception is so small that it disappears entirely from your awareness. But occasionally, when something unexpected appears, you can feel that gap. A slight hesitation, a moment of recalibration, a sense that the world did not quite match what your mind was preparing for. And in those moments, you begin to sense just how active your perception truly is. It is not a passive window onto reality. It is a process, a continuous conversation between what is expected and what is received. And this conversation does not happen in a straight line from the eyes to the mind. It flows in both directions. Information moves inward from the world, while expectations move outward from your brain, meeting somewhere in between, blending together into what you experience as sight. This blending is what allows your perception to feel stable, even when the raw input is fragmented, delayed, or incomplete. It is also what allows time itself to feel continuous, even when there are small interruptions beneath the surface. Because when your brain predicts what is about to be seen, it is not only preparing for the image, it is also preparing for the timing of that image. It is setting a gentle expectation for when the moment should begin, how long it should last, and how it should connect to what came before. And when the actual perception arrives, that expectation helps shape how the moment is experienced. If the timing aligns closely with the prediction, everything feels natural, smooth, and uninterrupted. If there is a slight mismatch, the brain quietly adjusts, stretching or compressing the perceived moment just enough to restore continuity. This is part of the deeper reason why that first second on the clock feels longer. It is not only filling in the gap after the movement, it is also aligning the experience with what was expected to happen. The prediction and the perception meet, and in that meeting, time itself is gently shaped. There is something almost comforting about this. The idea that your mind is not simply reacting to the world, but actively preparing for it, smoothing its edges, guiding its flow, ensuring that each moment connects softly to the next. It means that your experience is not fragile. It is supported, carefully maintained by processes that operate quietly beneath your awareness. And yet, this support comes with a subtle trade-off, because if your perception is guided by expectation, then what you see is not purely what is there. It is what your brain believes is likely to be there. Most of the time, this belief is accurate enough that the difference is invisible, but the possibility remains that what you experience is always a blend, part reality, part anticipation. And somewhere within that blend, time itself becomes something more fluid than it first appears. Not a rigid sequence of fixed moments, but a gently shaped flow, influenced by both what has already happened and what is expected to happen next. As you rest with this thought, you might begin to sense that the present moment is not a sharp boundary between past and future, but a soft meeting point where memory and prediction overlap. A place where what you have seen and what you expect to see come together to form what feels like now. And in that soft meeting point, the experience of time becomes less about precise measurement and more about continuity, about the feeling that everything is unfolding in a way that makes sense, even if the underlying process is far more complex. This sense of continuity is something your brain works very carefully to preserve, because without it, the world would feel fragmented, uncertain, difficult to follow. Instead, your mind gently guides each moment into place, ensuring that what you experience feels smooth, even when the raw pieces are not. And yet, as we continue to explore this quiet system, it becomes clear that prediction is only part of the story. Because once your eyes arrive, once the new image is fully in view, there is still one more step, a final adjustment that ensures everything feels stable. Not just in time, but in space as well. A quiet shifting of the world itself, happening just beneath your awareness. And it is within that shifting that the next layer of this story begins to reveal itself. As the idea of your brain gently predicting the world before it fully appears begins to settle, there is one final layer in this quiet process. Something even more subtle, something that happens not just in time, but in space. Because it turns out that your brain doesn't simply prepare for what you are about to see, it also prepares for where it will be. When your eyes move from one point to another, the image on your retina, the light entering your eyes, shifts dramatically. Everything moves. Objects slide across your field of view, changing position in a way that, if you were to see it directly, would feel disorienting, even chaotic. And yet you never experience the world as jumping or sliding when your eyes move. Instead, everything feels stable, fixed in place, as though the world itself remains still, even while your eyes are constantly shifting. This stability is not coming from the outside, it is being created within. Before your eyes even arrive at their new position, your brain has already begun adjusting its internal map of the world. It takes into account the movement you're about to make and quietly shifts its representation of where things are, so that when your gaze lands, everything appears exactly where it should be. It is a bit like walking into a familiar room in the dark. Even before you turn on the light, you already have a sense of where the furniture is, where the walls are, where you can safely step. Your mind has arranged the space ahead of you, allowing you to move with confidence. In the same way, your brain arranges the visual world ahead of your gaze, so when your eyes finally arrive, there is no need to rebuild the scene from scratch. The structure is already in place. The objects are already where they're expected to be. The moment simply settles into position as though it had been waiting for you. This quiet adjustment happens incredibly quickly, and it happens constantly, with every shift of your eyes. It is so precise that you never notice it, and yet it is essential for the feeling that the world is stable. Without it, every movement of your gaze would feel like stepping onto shifting ground. Objects would appear to jump or slide unpredictably. The simple act of looking around would become tiring, even confusing. Instead, your brain gently aligns everything, smoothing over the differences between one viewpoint and the next. And this leads to a subtle but profound realization. You're not seeing the world exactly as it is in each instant. You're seeing a version of the world that has been carefully updated, adjusted, and aligned with your expectations. A version that feels continuous, even though it is being reconstructed moment by moment. This reconstruction is not something to be concerned about. In fact, it is what makes perception possible. Because without it, the raw information entering your eyes would be too unstable, too fragmented to form a coherent experience. So your brain builds stability. It creates a consistent world for you to move through, even though the underlying signals are constantly shifting. And in doing so, it reveals something quietly remarkable, that the sense of a fixed, stable environment is not simply given to you by reality, but actively maintained by your mind. Each glance, each shift of attention is supported by this invisible process of updating and alignment. And because it works so well, you rarely notice it. But once you begin to think about it, once you begin to sense how your perception is gently shaped, it becomes difficult to ignore the deeper implication that what you experience as where things are is not purely a reflection of the outside world. It is a collaboration between the incoming information and the brain's internal map, between what is seen and what is expected. And this collaboration is what allows you to move through the world with ease. It is what allows you to reach for objects without hesitation, to follow motion smoothly, to recognize familiar places instantly. But it also means that your perception is always, in a quiet way, one step removed from raw reality. Not inaccurate, not misleading, but interpreted. And this interpretation extends beyond space into time itself. Because when your brain updates the position of objects before your eyes arrive, it is also shaping when those objects appear to be where they are. It is aligning not only space, but timing, ensuring that each moment connects smoothly to the next, without sudden jumps or gaps. And so, the same system that keeps the world stable in space also contributes to the way time feels continuous. It is all part of a single, quiet effort to maintain coherence, to create an experience that feels whole. As you rest with this idea, you might begin to notice that the present moment is not as simple as it first seems. It is not just a snapshot of what is happening right now. It is the result of a series of adjustments, predictions and alignments, all coming together to form something that feels immediate and real. A carefully balanced construction where space and time are gently shaped to support your experience. And within that construction, small illusions like the stopped clock are not anomalies, but natural expressions of the system at work. They're moments where the underlying process becomes just visible enough to be noticed. Small openings, where you can glimpse the way your mind is quietly organising the world around you. And perhaps what is most interesting is that this organisation is not rigid. It is flexible, adaptive, capable of shifting depending on context, attention and expectation, which means that the way you experience time and space is not fixed once and for all, but something that can subtly change from moment to moment, a living process. As your awareness settles into this thought, another gentle question begins to form. If your brain is constantly adjusting space and time to create a stable experience, then what determines how those adjustments feel? Why do some moments seem to stretch, while others seem to pass in an instant? Why does time sometimes feel slow and full, and other times fast and fleeting? The answer to that question lies not just in how you see the world, but in how your mind interprets it, how it assigns importance, novelty, and attention to each moment. And it is within that interpretation that the deeper architecture of subjective time begins to reveal itself. As the quiet coordination between your eyes and your mind begins to take shape, something deeper starts to unfold, something that reaches beyond vision and into the very way you experience time itself. Because up to this point, it may have felt as though time was simply there, flowing steadily in the background, like a river moving at a constant pace, independent of what you see or feel. Seconds pass, minutes follow, everything moves forward, one moment after another, with a kind of quiet certainty. But as we begin to look a little closer, that certainty starts to soften. The experience of time is not as fixed as it seems. In fact, your brain does not contain a single, steady clock that ticks away at the same pace, measuring each moment with perfect precision. There is no central mechanism quietly counting seconds in the way a watch or a clock might do. Instead, time is something that emerges from many different processes working together. You can imagine it as a kind of gentle collaboration, where different parts of the brain contribute small pieces of information, each one reflecting something slightly different: attention, memory, expectation, emotion, and together they form your sense of how long something feels. It is less like a ticking clock and more like a soft rhythm shaped by many instruments playing together. When everything is calm and familiar, that rhythm feels steady. Time seems to move at an even pace, predictable and smooth. But when something changes, when your attention sharpens or your emotions shift or something unexpected appears, the rhythm changes too. Moments can stretch or compress or seem to slip past almost unnoticed. And this is where the earlier idea of that lingering second begins to connect more deeply with the way you experience time as a whole. Because if your brain is already capable of gently extending a single moment after your eyes move, then it is also capable of adjusting the way entire experiences feel over longer periods. Not in a dramatic way, not enough to make time stop or reverse, but enough to shape how you remember it, how you feel it, how it seems to pass. Think about a quiet afternoon where nothing much happens. The hours drift by softly without urgency, and when you look back it may feel as though time moved slowly, almost lazily. Now think about a moment of anticipation, perhaps waiting for something important, watching the seconds pass, feeling each one distinctly. In that state, time seems to stretch, each moment becoming fuller, more noticeable. And then there are times when everything moves quickly, when you're engaged, distracted, or absorbed in something, and suddenly much more time has passed than you expected. These experiences are familiar, but what they reveal is something subtle and important. Time, as you feel it, is not simply measured, it is interpreted. Your brain is not counting seconds in a strict mechanical way. It is constructing a sense of duration based on what is happening within you and around you. Attention plays a quiet but powerful role in this. When your attention is focused, when something feels important or new, your brain processes more detail, more information, more nuance within each moment. And because there is more to take in, the moment feels richer, longer, more extended. When attention drifts, when things are repetitive or familiar, less information is processed, and time seems to pass more quickly, slipping by almost unnoticed. In this way, the feeling of time stretching or shrinking is closely tied to how deeply you're engaged with the present moment. And this brings us back gently to the illusion of the stopped clock. When your eyes land on the clock, that first moment is new. It captures your attention. It stands out against what came before. And because it stands out, your brain gives it more weight, more presence. It feels longer, not because time itself has changed, but because your perception of that moment has been enriched. This effect is not limited to clocks. You may notice it when something unexpected happens, when a sudden sound breaks the silence, or when your attention is drawn sharply to a new detail. The first moment of awareness often feels slightly extended, as though your mind is giving it just a little more space to be noticed. This is part of a broader pattern in the way your brain prioritizes information. New, important, or surprising events are given more attention, more processing, more significance, and as a result they often feel longer than the quiet, familiar moments that surround them. There's also a gentle influence from memory. When you look back on an experience, the number of details you remember can shape how long it seems to have lasted. A day filled with new experiences may feel long in retrospect, even if it passed quickly while you were living it. A routine day with few distinct moments may feel shorter when remembered, even if it seems slow at the time. So time has a kind of dual nature. There is the time you feel while something is happening, and the time you feel when you look back on it. Both are shaped by your mind, both are flexible, and both are quietly constructed. As you rest with this idea, you may begin to sense that the present moment is not a fixed point moving steadily forward, but something softer, something shaped by attention, enriched by detail, and gently influenced by memory. A moment is not just a slice of time, it is an experience, and the richness of that experience determines how it feels. In this light, the stretched second of the clock is no longer an isolated curiosity. It becomes part of a larger pattern, a small example of a broader truth. That time, as you live it, is not something that simply happens to you. It is something your mind participates in, shapes, adjusts, and gently brings into being moment by moment. And as this realization settles, another question begins to emerge, not as something urgent, but as a soft curiosity. If your sense of time can change depending on attention, novelty, and experience, then what determines which moments feel rich and extended, and which ones fade quietly into the background? What makes a moment stand out? What gives it weight? And it is within that question that the next layer of this story begins to unfold, where certain moments become more vivid, more lasting, and where time itself seems to expand in response to what feels new, unexpected, or important. As the idea that time is shaped by attention and experience begins to settle, a very simple observation starts to take on new meaning. Something you may have noticed many times, but perhaps never paused long enough to explore. The first moment of something often feels different. Not dramatically, not in a way that demands attention, but in a quiet, almost imperceptible way. It feels fuller, slightly extended, as though it carries a little more weight than the moments that follow. You might notice this when a sound suddenly breaks the silence, like a soft chime in a quiet room. The very first note seems to linger, to stand out, to occupy a space that feels just a bit larger than expected. The notes that follow may be identical, but they do not quite have the same presence. Or, when you step into a new place, even a familiar one after some time away, there is often a brief moment where everything feels more vivid, more detailed, as though your mind is taking a slightly deeper breath. And then, slowly, that intensity softens, and the experience settles into something more familiar. This pattern appears again and again. The first moment stands out, and then the rest begin to flow more smoothly, more quietly. There is a gentle explanation for this, one that connects beautifully with everything we have been exploring. Your brain pays special attention to what is new. Whenever something changes, whenever a new stimulus appears, your mind responds by increasing its level of processing. It gathers more detail, examines the moment more closely, and in doing so creates a richer experience. And because that moment is richer, it feels longer. Not because time itself has changed, but because more is happening within that moment, more information being taken in, more awareness being applied. You can imagine it like turning up the brightness on a scene. The more clearly you see, the more there is to notice and the more time it seems to occupy. This effect has been observed in many different ways, but it can be understood simply without needing any formal terminology. When something is different, your brain leans in, When something is familiar, your brain relaxes, and that leaning in stretches the moment. This is why the first glance at the clock feels longer. It is not just that your brain is filling in the gap from the eye movement, it is also that the moment itself is new. Your attention has shifted, something has changed, and in response, your mind gives that moment more space. It allows it to expand just slightly so that it can be fully taken in. After that, as nothing changes, as the ticking continues in a steady rhythm, your attention begins to settle, and each subsequent second feels more ordinary, more evenly paced. The first moment stands apart. The rest follow quietly. This pattern can be noticed in many parts of life. The first drop of rain after a long dry spell feels more vivid than the ones that follow. The first step into cold water feels sharper than the rest. The first bite of a meal carries more presence than the ones that come after. In each case, the initial moment is new, unexpected, or at least different enough to draw your attention more fully. And in that attention, the moment expands. There is something comforting about this. It suggests that time, as you experience it, is not indifferent. It responds to you, to what you notice, to what feels meaningful or different. Moments are not all the same. Some are quiet and passing. Others are held just a little longer, as though your mind is gently saying, "Stay here for a moment." And this brings a new layer of understanding to the illusion we began with. The stopped clock is not only about hidden eye movements or filled gaps, it is also about attention, about the way your mind responds to change. When your gaze lands on the clock, that moment is both new and important. It stands out against what came before, and your brain responds by giving it more processing, more clarity, more presence. And that presence is what you feel as time stretching. It is not a distortion in the usual sense. It is a reflection of engagement, a sign that your mind is fully attending to what is in front of you. As your attention begins to settle, as the ticking becomes familiar, the need for that extra processing fades, and time returns to its usual rhythm, smooth, even, unremarkable, until the next change, until the next moment that draws your attention once more. And so, the experience of time becomes a kind of quiet dance between novelty and familiarity, between moments that stand out and moments that blend together. The more something stands out, the more space it seems to occupy. The more it blends in, the more quickly it passes, and this dance is happening constantly, shaping the flow of your experience in ways that are subtle, yet deeply influential. As you rest with this idea, you might begin to notice that the moments that feel longest are not always the ones that are objectively longer, but the ones that feel richest, the ones that carry more detail, more awareness, more presence. Time, in this sense, is not just about duration. It is about depth. And depth is something your mind creates, something it chooses, moment by moment, based on what it considers important, new, or worthy of attention. This realization opens a quiet door. Because if attention can stretch a moment, even slightly, then the way you direct your attention may shape how time feels to you in ways you have never fully considered. And that leads gently to another layer of the story. Because attention is not only influenced by what is new, but also by how you feel, by emotion, by significance, by the quiet signals within you that say, "This matters." And it is within those signals that time can stretch even further, sometimes in ways that feel much more intense. As the role of attention begins to settle into place, another quiet influence slowly comes into view, one that feels even more personal, more immediate, and at times more powerful. Emotion. Because there are moments in life where time does not just stretch gently, but seems to expand in a way that feels unmistakable. A sudden sound in the night, a near miss while crossing the street, a moment of unexpected joy, or a surge of anxiety that arrives without warning. In these moments, time can feel as though it slows down, not completely, not in a way that stops the world, but just enough that everything becomes clearer, sharper, more detailed. You notice more, you feel more. Each fraction of a second seems to carry more weight than usual, and when the moment passes, it often lingers in memory, vivid and precise, as though it had been given extra space to exist. This experience is so familiar that it has become part of everyday language. People often say that time slows down during intense moments, as if the flow of time itself had changed. But just as with the quiet pause of the clock, the change is not happening in time itself. It is happening in you. When something feels important, especially when it carries a sense of urgency or significance, your brain shifts into a different mode of processing. It begins to gather information more rapidly, more intensely, drawing in details that might otherwise go unnoticed. You can imagine it like turning up the sensitivity of a camera, allowing more light to enter, capturing more detail within the same span of time. The moment itself has not become longer, but the amount of experience within that moment has increased, and because there is more to process, more to remember, more to feel, the moment seems to stretch. It feels longer because it is richer. There's a small, deeply embedded system within your brain that plays a key role in this process, a region that is particularly attuned to emotional significance, especially in situations that may involve risk or reward. You do not need to know its name to understand what it does. It acts like a quiet signal, a gentle but urgent whisper that says, "Pay attention, this matters." And when that signal is strong, your entire perception shifts. Time slows, not in reality but in experience. Your awareness becomes more focused, your memory becomes more active, and the moment expands. This is not an accident, it is a form of adaptation. In situations where quick responses are important, where details may influence outcomes, it is useful for the brain to process more information in less time, to capture as much of the moment as possible. The feeling of time slowing down is a natural result of this increased processing. It gives you the sense that you have more time to react, even though, in objective terms, the same amount of time has passed. And yet, this effect is not limited to intense or dramatic situations. It can appear in quieter ways as well. Think of waiting for an important message, watching the seconds pass on a screen, feeling each one distinctly, almost physically. Or sitting in a moment of uncertainty, where the future feels close, yet not quite within reach. In these moments, emotion gently stretches time, not through urgency, but through significance. The more something matters to you, the more your mind leans into it, the more detail it gathers, and the more the moment seems to expand. And this brings us back once again to that simple image of the clock, because when you first look at it, there is a subtle shift in attention, a small moment of novelty. But there is also something else, a quiet engagement, a brief alignment of focus. And in that alignment, the moment gains a little more presence. It is not as intense as the emotional moments we have just described, but it follows the same underlying principle. More attention, more processing, a slightly longer feeling moment. And this reveals something gently profound. That time, as you experience it, is not only shaped by what you see or how your eyes move, but also by how you feel about what you're seeing. Emotion adds depth to time. It gives moments texture, weight, and significance. And in doing so, it influences how long those moments seem to last. Some moments pass quietly, leaving only a faint trace behind. Others linger, not because they lasted longer, but because they were felt more deeply. And this interplay between emotion and time is something you carry with you constantly, shaping your experience in ways that are often subtle, yet deeply meaningful. As you sit with this idea, you might begin to notice that the moments that feel longest are not always the ones that are most intense, but the ones that are most present, the ones where your attention and your emotion come together, creating a richer, fuller experience. And in that fullness, time seems to stretch just enough to hold everything. This stretching is not something to resist. It is something to notice, because it offers a small glimpse into the flexibility of your perception, the way your mind gently shapes time to match the significance of the moment, and perhaps, in noticing it, you begin to see that time is not something entirely outside of you. It is something you participate in, something that reflects not just the passage of events, but the depth of your experience. And as this thought settles, another layer begins to unfold, one that shifts from the intensity of emotion to the quiet patterns of memory. Because while some moments feel long as they happen, others feel long only when you look back on them. And in that difference, there is another gentle mystery waiting to be explored. As the influence of emotion gently fades into the background, another layer begins to emerge, one that feels quieter, more reflective, and yet just as powerful in shaping your sense of time. Memory. Because there is something curious about the way time feels while it is happening, and the way it feels when you look back on it later. The two are not always the same. In fact, they often move in opposite directions. You may have noticed this in your own life, in moments that seem to pass quickly, almost slipping through your fingers while you are living them, yet later, when you remember them, they feel long, full and rich with detail. And then there are moments that seem to stretch endlessly while you are inside them, perhaps during a quiet wait or a slow afternoon. Yet when you look back, they feel surprisingly brief, almost as though they never fully formed. This quiet reversal is sometimes described as a kind of paradox, though you do not need the word to feel its truth. It is simply the way your mind works. When you're in the middle of an experience, your sense of time is shaped largely by attention and emotion. If you're deeply engaged, absorbed in something, your attention is focused, but not necessarily on the passage of time itself. You are present but not measuring, and so time seems to move quickly. Moments flow into one another without interruption, and before you realize it, much more time has passed than you expected. But when you look back on that same experience, something different happens. Your memory begins to reconstruct what took place, not as a continuous flow, but as a collection of moments, each one containing details, impressions, and small fragments of experience. The more distinct moments there are, the richer the memory becomes, and the richer the memory, the longer the experience seems in retrospect. It is as though your mind is measuring time not by how long it lasted, but by how much it contains. A day filled with new experiences, unfamiliar places, or meaningful events creates many distinct memories. Each one adds a small piece to the overall picture, making the day feel long when you look back on it. In contrast, a day that is repetitive, familiar, or uneventful creates fewer distinct memories. The moments blend together, leaving fewer markers behind, and as a result, the day feels shorter in retrospect, even if it felt slow while it was happening. You can think of it like walking along a path. If the path is filled with landmarks, trees, turns, and interesting details, the journey feels substantial when you remember it. There is more to recall, more to reconstruct, more to hold on to. If the path is empty, straight, and unchanging, it may feel long while you're walking it, but afterward, it leaves very little behind, and the memory feels brief. This gentle difference between experienced time and remembered time reveals something important. Your sense of duration is not fixed. It depends on how your mind processes the moment while it is happening, and how it reconstructs that moment afterward. And this brings us back once again to the idea that time is something your mind participates in shaping. When you experience a moment, your attention and emotion determine how it feels in the present. When you remember it, the number of details and distinct events determines how it feels in the past. Two different processes, two different perspectives, both shaping your sense of time. And somewhere between these two perspectives lies your overall experience of life, a blend of moments that felt fast and moments that felt slow, woven together into a continuous story. This understanding adds a quiet depth to the earlier idea of that stretched second on the clock. Because even in that small illusion, both processes are at work. In the present, the first moment feels longer because your attention is focused and the experience is slightly richer. In memory, that moment stands out, distinct and noticeable, making it feel more significant than the seconds that followed. It becomes a small anchor point, a detail that your mind holds onto. And this suggests something gently profound, that the moments you notice, the ones that stand out, are not only experienced differently in the present, but also remembered differently in the future. They shape not just how time feels now, but how it will feel when you look back on it. And this opens a quiet possibility that by changing how you experience moments, by allowing more attention, more presence, more awareness, you may also be shaping how your life feels in memory. Not by altering the passage of time itself, but by influencing how much of each moment is truly noticed, how much is gathered, how much is kept. There is something peaceful in this idea. It suggests that time is not something that simply slips away beyond your control. It is something that can be gently enriched, moment by moment, through attention and awareness, even in small ways. Even in something as simple as noticing the pause of a clock or the stillness of a quiet room. As this thought settles, you might begin to sense that time has a kind of rhythm to it, not just in the present, but across memory as well. A rhythm shaped by novelty, attention, emotion, and the quiet act of remembering. Some moments expand while you live them, others expand when you look back, and together, they create the feeling of a life that moves at many different speeds, sometimes rushing, sometimes lingering, always shifting. And yet, through all of this, one question remains, soft and unhurried. If time can feel so different depending on attention, emotion, and memory, then what happens in a world where attention itself is constantly pulled in many directions? What happens when moments are no longer given the space to be noticed fully, to be experienced deeply, to be remembered clearly? It is within that question that the next part of this journey begins to take shape, where the modern rhythm of life gently meets the quiet flexibility of the mind. As these layers begin to gather, the movement of your eyes, the quiet dimming of vision, the gentle filling of gaps, and the soft predictions forming just ahead of awareness, a larger picture begins to take shape, one that is less about isolated processes and more about a continuous flowing system. A system that does not simply observe the world, but quietly assembles it. Because what you experience as reality, moment by moment, is not a raw stream of information arriving untouched from the outside. It is something more refined, more carefully arranged, something that has been gently shaped before it ever reaches your awareness. You can think of it, if you like, as a kind of quiet editing process, happening beneath the surface of your mind, where each moment is prepared, adjusted, and placed just where it needs to be, so that the whole feels smooth, not perfect, but seamless. It begins very simply with what your eyes take in, the light, the shapes, the colours that fall onto the delicate surface at the back of your vision. This is the starting point, the raw material, like a series of frames captured by a camera. But unlike a camera, your brain does not simply display these frames one after another. It pauses, softly. Each time your eyes move, there is that brief moment we explored earlier, where the incoming image is gently reduced, where clarity fades just enough to hide the motion. It is not a full stop, but a quiet silence, like a breath between thoughts. And within that silence, something important begins to happen. Your brain prepares. Before the next clear image fully arrives, there is already a sense of what it might contain, a subtle expectation shaped by everything you have seen before. This expectation is not rigid, not precise, but flexible, like a sketch waiting to be filled in. When the new image comes into focus, it does not arrive into an empty space. It arrives into that expectation, and the two meet. The incoming detail and the quiet prediction blend together, smoothing over any small differences, ensuring that the transition feels natural, even if the underlying signals were not perfectly aligned. Then, almost without notice, your brain makes another adjustment. It aligns the scene, the positions of objects, the layout of space, the relationships between what you're seeing now and what you saw just a moment ago. All of this is gently shifted into place so that everything feels stable, so that the world does not appear to jump or slide when your eyes move. And finally, the moment is woven into the flow of your experience. Placed just after the one before it, connected seamlessly to what comes next, forming what feels like a continuous present. Taken together, these steps form a quiet rhythm. First, something is seen. Then, the transition is softened. Then, the mind prepares what is expected. Then, the image is gently aligned. And finally, it is stitched into the ongoing stream of awareness. This is not something you notice directly. It is not something you can point to in the moment. But it is happening constantly, shaping every experience you have. And what is remarkable is how effortless it feels. There is no sense of construction, no awareness of editing, no feeling that anything is being adjusted at all. Instead, there is only the experience of a stable, continuous world, one that seems to exist independently of you, even though it is being quietly assembled within you. This is not to say that what you see is false, far from it. The world you perceive is deeply grounded in reality, guided by the information your senses provide. But it is not a perfect copy. It is a version, a carefully arranged version, shaped by the needs of your perception. Because what your brain values most is not absolute accuracy in every tiny detail, but coherence, continuity, a sense that everything fits together, that each moment flows naturally into the next. And to achieve that, it allows for small adjustments, tiny shifts in timing, gentle alignments of space, subtle extensions of moments, all working together to create the feeling that you are moving through a stable, reliable world. And in most cases, this system works so well that it disappears completely. You live your life within this constructed flow, never needing to question it, never feeling the seams beneath the surface. But every now and then, something small reveals itself. A stretched second on a clock, a moment that feels just a little too long, a subtle pause that does not quite match the steady ticking you expect. And in that moment, the illusion softens just enough for you to glimpse the process behind it. Not fully, not in detail, but enough to sense that what feels continuous is, in fact, composed. And there is something strangely comforting in that realization, because it means that your experience of reality is not fragile. It is supported, carefully maintained by processes that are always working in your favor, always smoothing, aligning, and stitching together the fragments of perception into something whole. You're not simply watching the world, you're participating in its construction, gently, constantly, without effort. And as this idea settles into place, another quiet understanding begins to emerge. If the world you experience is shaped in this way, if continuity is something your mind creates rather than something it simply receives, then perhaps the feeling of now, that sense of being in a continuous present moment, is also part of that construction. Not a fixed point in time, but something assembled, moment by moment. And if that is true, then the present is not a single, precise instant, but a soft flowing window shaped by perception, memory, and expectation, all working together to create the experience of being here, right now. And it is within that softly constructed now that the next layer of this journey begins to unfold, where the illusion becomes so seamless that it feels indistinguishable from reality itself. As this idea of reality being quietly assembled begins to settle into place, something even more subtle comes into view. Not just how perception is constructed, but why it feels so effortless, so complete, so entirely convincing. Because for all the small adjustments your brain is making, all the gentle smoothing, the soft predictions, the hidden transitions, there is one thing you almost never experience: the gaps. You do not feel the moments when your vision dims. You do not notice the brief silence while your eyes move. You do not sense the adjustments as your brain aligns space and time. Instead, what you experience is a continuous present, a seamless flow where one moment naturally becomes the next, without interruption, without hesitation, without any visible sign that anything has been rearranged. And that raises a quiet, fascinating question. Why don't you notice any of it? Why does the illusion hold so completely? Part of the answer lies in what your brain is trying to achieve. Because the goal of perception is not to present a perfectly accurate record of every tiny change in the visual world. It is to provide a stable, usable experience. A world that feels consistent, predictable, safe to move through. If your perception were perfectly accurate in a raw, unfiltered sense, you would see every flicker, every blur, every tiny interruption caused by the constant movement of your eyes. The world would feel unstable, as though it were shifting beneath you with each glance. It would be difficult to read, difficult to focus, difficult even to trust what you were seeing. So your brain makes a quiet trade. It allows small inaccuracies, small adjustments, small edits. In order to create a larger sense of stability, it prefers a world that is slightly imperfect but continuous over a world that is perfectly accurate but fragmented. And because of this preference, it actively hides anything that might break the illusion of continuity. The gaps are not simply overlooked, they are smoothed over, replaced, integrated so completely that they leave no trace. You can imagine it like watching a film where the cuts between scenes are invisible, where each transition is blended so carefully that you never notice where one shot ends and the next begins. The story feels continuous, even though it is made up of many separate pieces. In the same way, your perception feels like a continuous stream, even though it is composed of countless small moments, each one shaped, adjusted, and connected to the next. And this seamlessness extends beyond vision. It shapes your entire sense of the present. What you call now does not feel like a thin, precise instant. It feels like a small window, a soft, flowing interval that holds together everything you're experiencing at once, the sounds around you, the feeling of your body, the thoughts moving quietly through your mind, all of it gathered into a single, coherent moment. But this now is not as simple as it seems. It is not a fixed point in time. It is something your brain constructs moment by moment by combining recent information with current input and a touch of expectation. It is, in a way, a small stretch of time gently woven together so that it feels like a single, unified experience. And because it is constructed in this way, it has a certain softness to it, a flexibility. It can absorb small delays. It can smooth over tiny interruptions. It can adjust itself just enough to maintain the feeling of continuity. This is why you do not notice the gaps, because they are not presented to you as gaps. They are blended into the fabric of the present, and this blending is so complete that the illusion becomes indistinguishable from reality. There's no sense that anything is missing, no awareness that anything has been altered, only the experience of a stable, continuous world unfolding moment by moment. And yet, every now and then, something small disrupts that smoothness. Not enough to break it, but enough to reveal it. The pause of a clock's second hand, a moment that feels slightly longer than it should, a subtle hesitation that does not quite match the steady rhythm you expect. These moments are like tiny cracks in the surface, not flaws but openings, places where you can glimpse the structure beneath. They remind you that continuity is not simply given, it is created. And once you begin to see that, once you begin to sense that your experience of now is something assembled rather than something fixed, the world takes on a slightly different quality. Not less real, but more fluid, more open, less rigid than it first appeared. There is something strangely reassuring about this, because it means that your perception is not fragile, it is adaptable, designed to keep your experience smooth, even in the face of constant change. And this adaptability is what allows you to move through the world with ease, to shift your attention, to navigate complex environments, all without ever feeling overwhelmed by the underlying complexity. But it also means that what feels perfectly stable may not be perfectly precise, that the present moment, as you experience it, is not a perfect snapshot of reality, but a carefully constructed blend, a balance between accuracy and continuity, and your brain quietly and consistently chooses continuity, because a continuous world is easier to live in, easier to understand, easier to trust. As this realization settles, it gently shifts the way you might think about time itself, because if the present moment is not a fixed instant, but a softly constructed window, then the length of that window, the way it feels, the way it flows, may not be as rigid as it seems. It may stretch, compress, adjust itself in subtle ways depending on how your mind is shaping the experience. And that brings us naturally to the next layer of this exploration. Because if the now you experience is flexible, if it can be gently shaped and adjusted, then the idea of a perfectly fixed second, a unit of time that always feels the same, begins to soften as well. A second may not always feel like a second. It may be something more fluid, more adaptable, more closely tied to your perception than to any external measure. And within that softness lies another quiet insight, waiting to be explored. As the idea of a seamless present begins to soften, another assumption quietly comes into question, one that feels so basic, so familiar, that it is rarely examined at all. The idea of a second, a simple unit of time, something we often treat as fixed, precise, unchanging. A second is a second, or at least that is how it appears. Clocks measure it, devices rely on it, Entire systems are built around the assumption that each second is identical to the last, moving forward in a steady, predictable rhythm. And in the physical world, that assumption holds true. Time, as measured by instruments, follows consistent patterns, defined with extraordinary precision. The ticking of a clock, the oscillation of tiny systems within it, all work together to maintain a stable, objective measure. But the time you experience is something else. Because while the external world may measure seconds with perfect consistency, your perception of those seconds is far more flexible. A second, as you feel it, is not a fixed container. It is a moment shaped by attention, emotion, memory, and the quiet processes we have been exploring. And because of that, it can change, not in a way that breaks reality, not in a way that alters the actual passage of time, but in a way that gently reshapes how that passage is experienced. Some seconds feel full, others feel empty, some seem to stretch, expanding just enough to hold more detail, more awareness, more presence. Others pass quickly, slipping by almost unnoticed, leaving only a faint impression behind. This variability is not random. It follows patterns. Patterns shaped by how your mind engages with the moment. When something is new, your attention sharpens and the second feels longer. When something is emotionally significant, your perception deepens and the second expands. When something is familiar or repetitive, your attention softens and the second seems to pass more quickly. And woven into all of this is the quiet influence of your eyes, your movements, your predictions, and the subtle adjustments your brain makes to keep everything continuous. The stretched second of the clock, the one that seemed to pause, is not an isolated curiosity. It is a small window into this broader flexibility, a moment where the usual rhythm of time becomes just visible enough to be noticed. And once you begin to notice it, the idea of a perfectly fixed second becomes a little less certain. Because what you are experiencing is not the second itself. You're experiencing your mind's interpretation of it, a constructed version, shaped moment by the processes we have been gently uncovering. This does not make time less real. It makes your experience of time more nuanced, more alive. Because instead of moving through identical units, one after another, you're moving through moments that can expand, compress, and shift in subtle ways. Each one carrying a slightly different texture, a slightly different depth. And this texture is what gives time its richness. It is what allows a brief moment to feel meaningful, or a long period to pass quietly, almost without notice. It is what allows a single glance at a clock to feel stretched, while hours of routine pass in the background. There is something quietly liberating in this, because it means that your experience of time is not entirely outside your influence. It is not something that simply happens to you, measured with perfect indifference. It is something your mind participates in shaping, something that responds to how you attend, how you feel, how you engage with the world. And this participation does not require effort. It is happening already, every moment. But becoming aware of it changes something. It brings a sense of softness to time, a sense that the rigid structure we often imagine is, in experience, more fluid than it appears. And this softness can be felt even in very small ways. In the quiet pause before a thought completes, in the stillness between two breaths, in the lingering moment after your eyes settle on something new. These are not disruptions of time, they're expressions of its flexibility, gentle reminders that what feels continuous is, in fact, composed. And within that composition, there is room for variation, room for moments to stretch just a little, room for experience to deepen. As this understanding begins to settle, it naturally connects back to everything we have explored so far. The movement of your eyes, creating small hidden gaps, the dimming of vision, softening transitions, the prediction of what is about to be seen, the quiet alignment of space, the filling in of silence, the shaping of attention and emotion. All of these processes come together to form what you experience as time, not as a rigid sequence of identical units, but as a living flow, gently shaped by the way your mind engages with the world. And within that flow, the idea of a fixed second becomes less important than the experience of the moment itself. Because what matters in the end is not how long a second is measured to be, it is how that second is felt. And that feeling can change, it can stretch, it can soften, it can become more or less present depending on how your mind meets it. And this brings us to a quiet turning point in this journey, because if a second is not fixed, if it can expand and contract within your experience, then the way you live your moments, the way you attend to them, may shape not only how time feels, but how your life unfolds within it, not by changing the external flow of time, but by changing the depth of each moment within it. And this raises a gentle, important question. What happens in a world where moments are constantly filled, where attention is always pulled forward, where there is little space for time to stretch? What happens when the natural rhythm of perception is interrupted, not by necessity, but by the pace of the environment itself? It is within that question that the next part of this exploration begins, where the quiet flexibility of the mind meets the constant movement of the modern world. As the idea of time becoming softer, more flexible, more shaped by perception begins to settle, it naturally meets the world you live in each day, a world that feels, in many ways, very different from the quiet, stretched moments we've been exploring. Because there is a feeling that many people share, a subtle sense that time is moving faster than it used to. Days seem to pass quickly, weeks blur together, moments slip by without leaving much of a trace, and often this feeling is not tied to any single event, but to the rhythm of everyday life itself, a rhythm that has changed. In the past, there were more natural pauses woven into the day, moments of waiting, of stillness, of quiet observation, time spent sitting, watching, noticing small details without urgency. But in the world you move through now, those pauses have become less common. Instead, your attention is often gently, continuously pulled forward from one thing to the next, from one piece of information to another, in a steady stream that rarely settles. You reach for your phone for a moment, perhaps just to check the time, and within seconds your attention is drawn into something else, a message, a headline, a short video, something small, something quick, something designed to capture your focus just long enough to move you to the next, and then the next, and the next. Each piece is brief, often only a few seconds long, but together they form a continuous flow that fills the space where pauses once existed. In this environment, your attention rarely rests. It shifts rapidly, moving from one point to another in a pattern that begins to resemble the very movements of your eyes that we explored earlier: quick jumps, brief stops, constant motion. But now, it is not just your eyes that are moving, it is your mind. Each new piece of content becomes a small shift in attention, a tiny jump from one focus to another, each one requiring your brain to adjust, to process, to move forward again. And while each moment is brief, the overall effect is continuous. There is little space for stillness, little space for a moment to fully settle, to expand, to be experienced deeply. And this has a quiet effect on the way time feels, because as we have seen, Moments tend to stretch when attention is focused, when something is new, when the mind has space to engage fully with what is present. But when attention is constantly shifting, constantly being redirected, each moment is given only a small portion of awareness before the next one arrives. There is less depth, less richness. And as a result, time begins to feel compressed. Not because it is moving faster in any objective sense, but because each moment contains less of your attention, less of your awareness. It becomes lighter, more fleeting. And when many such moments are placed together, they pass quickly, leaving behind fewer distinct impressions. This is why an hour spent scrolling through short, rapidly changing content can feel as though it disappeared almost instantly, while a single, uninterrupted experience, even if shorter in duration, can feel fuller, more substantial. It is not the amount of time that changes, it is the density of experience within that time. And in a world where attention is constantly divided, that density can become quite thin. Moments pass, but they do not always settle. They do not always leave a strong imprint. And so, when you look back, the memory feels brief, even if the time itself was long. There is something subtle happening here. The same system that allows your brain to stretch a moment, to fill in gaps, to create continuity, is now being engaged in a different way. Instead of deepening individual moments, it is being asked to handle a rapid sequence of small, fragmented experiences. And in doing so, it adapts. It becomes efficient, quick to shift, quick to move on, but perhaps less inclined to linger, less inclined to allow a moment to fully unfold. And over time, this pattern shapes your overall experience of time. Days feel faster, moments feel shorter. Life, in a quiet way, feels as though it is moving more quickly, not because time itself has changed, but because the way you are engaging with it has shifted. This is not something to resist or judge. It is simply something to notice, because within that noticing, there is a gentle awareness that begins to form, an awareness that the feeling of time slipping away is not fixed, it is influenced, shaped by how attention moves, by how moments are experienced, and just as attention can be drawn outward, constantly shifting, it can also, at times, be allowed to settle, to rest, to remain with a single moment long enough for it to deepen. There is no need to change everything, no need to withdraw from the world, but perhaps simply to notice the difference between moments that pass quickly and moments that feel full, to sense how attention shapes that difference, and to recognize that within the flow of everyday life, there are still opportunities, small ones, quiet ones, where a moment can be experienced more fully, where time can stretch just slightly. And as this awareness begins to take shape, another layer becomes visible, because the world we live in does not only move quickly, it also leaves less space between moments, less space for the natural pauses that once allowed time to expand on its own. And it is within those missing pauses that the next part of this story gently unfolds. As the feeling of time quietly slipping away begins to take shape, there is another gentle shift that comes into focus, one that is not about speed, but about absence. Not what has been added to our experience, but what has slowly faded from it, the pauses. Because there was a time, not so long ago, when the rhythm of daily life naturally included small spaces of stillness, moments where nothing in particular was happening, and yet something subtle was unfolding within. Waiting for a bus, standing in a quiet line, sitting by a window watching the world pass slowly by. Moments that were not filled with information or urgency, but with a kind of quiet openness, where your attention had nowhere specific to go, and so it simply rested. These moments often felt unremarkable at the time, perhaps even slightly boring, and yet, within them, something important was happening. Time was stretching, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that demanded notice, but gently, almost imperceptibly, as your awareness settled into the present without interruption. There was space for a moment to unfold fully, space for small details to emerge, the sound of distant traffic, the shifting of light across a surface, the subtle rhythm of your own breathing. In these pauses, attention was not pulled forward. It was allowed to remain. And when attention remains, time begins to deepen. Moments become fuller, richer, more expansive. Not because they last longer in a measurable sense, but because they are experienced more completely. But in the world you move through now, those natural pauses have become less common. Not entirely gone, but often filled before they have a chance to settle. A quiet moment arises, and almost immediately something enters to occupy it. A notification, a message, a quick glance at a screen. Something small, something brief, but enough to shift attention away from stillness. And once attention shifts, the pause disappears. The moment does not have time to deepen. It passes quickly, replaced by the next, and then the next in a continuous flow that leaves little room for stillness. Over time, this changes the texture of experience. Moments no longer have the same space to expand. They become lighter, more fleeting, and as a result, time itself begins to feel more compressed. This is not because pauses were essential for time to exist. Time flows regardless. But pauses were essential for time to be felt. They were the spaces where awareness could settle, where perception could deepen, where moments could take on a fuller presence. Without them, the experience of time becomes more uniform, more continuous, but also more shallow. Like a river that flows steadily but without variation, without places to slow, to gather, to reflect. There is something quietly significant about this, because it suggests that the richness of time is not only found in what happens, but in what does not happen, in the spaces between events, in the moments when nothing is demanded of your attention, where your mind is free to rest. These spaces are not empty, they are open, and within that openness, perception has room to expand, to notice, to linger, and in lingering, to stretch time just slightly, creating a sense of depth that is often missing from more active moments. When these pauses are reduced, not eliminated entirely, but gently filled, moment by moment the overall experience begins to shift. Time feels faster, days feel shorter. Not because less time has passed, but because fewer moments have been allowed to fully unfold. Fewer moments have been given the chance to leave a strong impression. And so, when you look back, the memory feels thinner, less detailed, more compressed. There is less to hold on to, less that stands out. This is not a loss in a dramatic sense. It is subtle, gradual, something that happens quietly over time as patterns of attention shift. But it can be noticed, in the feeling that days pass quickly, in the sense that time moves faster than it used to, in the quiet awareness that something about the rhythm of experience has changed. And within that awareness there is a gentle opportunity, not to return to the past, not to remove the things that fill your time, but simply to notice the value of these pauses, to recognize that they are not empty moments to be avoided, but spaces where experience can deepen, where time can stretch, where perception can settle into something more complete. Even now, in the flow of modern life, these pauses still exist. They appear in small ways, in the moment before you reach for your phone, in the quiet space between two tasks, in the brief stillness of a room when nothing is demanding your attention. They're easy to overlook, easy to fill. But they're also easy to notice if you allow yourself to. And in noticing them, even briefly, you may begin to feel a slight shift, a sense that time is not moving quite as quickly, that a moment has opened just a little, giving you space to be present within it. This does not require effort. It does not require changing your habits entirely. It begins with awareness, with the simple recognition that these pauses exist and that within them, something quiet and valuable is happening. Something that connects directly to everything we've explored so far. The stretching of moments, the shaping of time through attention, the gentle construction of experience. Because in these pauses, your mind is no longer rushing to the next moment. It is resting within the current one. And in that rest, time begins to feel different. Not slower in a dramatic sense, but fuller, more complete. And as this idea settles, another layer begins to emerge. Because it is not only the absence of pauses that shapes the modern experience of time, but also the way in which attention is constantly guided, directed, and accelerated by the environments we engage with. And it is within that acceleration that the next part of this story begins to unfold. As the quiet spaces between moments begin to fade, and attention is gently drawn forward again and again, there is another pattern that slowly comes into view, one that does not simply fill time, but reshapes how it feels. A pattern of speed. Not the kind of speed you measure with clocks or distance, but a perceptual speed, a rhythm of experience that moves quickly, shifting your attention from one point to another in rapid succession. If you pause for a moment and consider how much of your day is spent engaging with visual content, whether it is scrolling through short videos, moving between apps, or watching rapidly edited scenes, you may begin to notice a certain similarity. Everything changes quickly, scenes shift, images appear and disappear. Focus moves constantly, rarely settling for long, and in many ways this pattern mirrors something you have already encountered, something happening within your own perception. The rapid movements of your eyes, those small, precise jumps that carry your gaze from one point to another, each one followed by a brief moment of stability before the next shift begins. In the natural rhythm of perception, these movements are balanced by pauses, small intervals where your eyes rest, where attention settles, where a moment can deepen. But in fast-paced environments, especially those designed to hold your attention, this balance begins to shift. The pauses become shorter, the jumps become more frequent, and over time, the pattern of your attention begins to resemble a continuous series of rapid shifts, moving from one stimulus to another without much space in between. It is not that your eyes are physically moving more than usual, but that your focus, your attention, is being guided in a way that mimics that rapid movement. Each new image, each new piece of content becomes a small shift, a tiny jump, drawing your awareness forward again. And because these shifts happen so quickly, the moments between them have little time to settle. They pass before they can deepen. They move on before they can fully form. This creates a subtle but important effect. The experience of time becomes fragmented, not in a way that feels broken, but in a way that feels light, fleeting, almost weightless. Moments come and go, each one brief, each one quickly replaced by the next, and because there is little depth within each moment, little time for attention to fully engage, the overall experience begins to feel compressed. Time seems to move faster, not because it is moving faster, but because each moment contains less detail, less presence, less of you. This is the illusion of speed. A feeling that life itself is accelerating, when in reality it is the structure of experience that has changed. Moments are shorter, not in duration, but in depth. They are experienced quickly, processed quickly, and then replaced. And because there are fewer deep moments to anchor your memory, when you look back, the time feels brief, like flipping through pages too quickly to read. There's also something else happening beneath the surface. Your brain, as we have seen, is designed to smooth transitions, to hide gaps, to create continuity, even when perception is fragmented. In a fast-paced environment, it continues to do this, stitching together the rapid sequence of moments into something that feels continuous. But this continuity is different from the slower, deeper continuity of a sustained experience. It is thinner, more fragile, a kind of surface-level flow that moves quickly but does not settle deeply. And over time, this pattern can influence your overall sense of time. Days feel faster, weeks seem to pass more quickly, not because time itself has changed, but because the moments that make up those days have been experienced in a lighter, less anchored way. There is a quiet irony in this, because the same processes that allow your brain to create a smooth, stable experience, the same mechanisms that hide gaps and stretch moments when needed, are now being engaged in a way that produces the opposite effect. Instead of deepening moments, they are smoothing over them quickly. Instead of stretching time, they are compressing the experience of it. And this is not something that happens suddenly. It is gradual, a shift in the rhythm of attention, repeated many times until it becomes familiar, until it feels normal. But once you begin to notice it, once you become aware of how quickly your attention moves, how briefly it rests, you may begin to sense the difference between a moment that is experienced fully and one that passes lightly. And that awareness is not meant to create concern. It is simply a gentle observation. Because within that observation lies the possibility of something different. Not by resisting speed entirely, not by stepping away from everything that moves quickly, but by recognizing that depth and speed are not the same. A moment can be brief and still feel full, and a long stretch of time can pass and still feel light. The difference lies in how attention is held, how long it rests, how fully it engages with what is present. And even within a fast-moving world, there are still moments where attention can settle, where perception can slow just enough to allow time to deepen. These moments are small, often unnoticed, but they are there, in the pause before the next action, in the breath between two thoughts, in the brief stillness when nothing new is being presented. And in these moments, the illusion of speed softens, time regains a little of its depth, a little of its presence, and as this awareness begins to settle, it naturally leads toward a final gentle shift. Because if time can feel compressed, if moments can pass lightly when attention is constantly moving, then perhaps the opposite is also possible. Perhaps moments can be gently widened, not by stopping time, but by changing the way you meet it. And it is within that possibility that the final part of this journey begins to unfold. As the sense of speed begins to soften and the quiet patterns of attention come back into view, something gentle and reassuring begins to take shape, a possibility. Not something dramatic, not a way to stop time or slow it down in the physical sense, but something quieter, more subtle, a way to experience more within the same moment. Because everything we have explored so far, the stretching of seconds, the filling of gaps, the quiet editing of perception, all points toward a simple, calming idea. Time, as you feel it, has a certain openness to it, a softness, a capacity to deepen. And this means that even within the steady flow of seconds, even within a world that often feels fast and full, there are still small opportunities for a moment to widen, just enough to be felt more fully. You may have already experienced this without naming it, A moment where your gaze rests a little longer than usual, where your attention settles, not because it has to, but because nothing is pulling it away. Perhaps you're looking at something simple, a shadow on a wall, the slow movement of leaves, the quiet stillness of a room. And for a brief time, nothing changes. Your eyes remain still, your mind becomes quiet, and the moment seems to stretch, just slightly. Not in a way that feels forced, but in a way that feels natural, as though time has opened a little, creating space for you to be present within it. This is not separate from the phenomenon we began with. It is closely related. That stretched second you noticed on the clock was not only a byproduct of your brain's internal processes, it was also a glimpse into this openness, a moment where perception slowed just enough for time to feel different. And while you cannot control all the underlying mechanisms that create that effect, the movements of your eyes, the subtle timing of neural processes, you can gently influence something else, your attention. Because attention is the thread that runs through everything we have explored. It shapes how moments are experienced, how deeply they are felt, how long they seem to last, and when attention is allowed to rest, even briefly, without being pulled forward, without being divided, something quiet begins to happen. Moments gain depth. They become fuller, more present. This does not require effort in the usual sense. It does not require forcing your mind to be still or holding your focus rigidly in place. It can begin in a much softer way, simply by noticing when a moment is already quiet and allowing it to remain that way just a little longer. There's a gentle practice hidden here, though it does not need to feel like a practice, more like an invitation to linger, to let your gaze rest on something without immediately moving on, to allow a sound to fade naturally without reaching for the next one, to notice the space between two thoughts without filling it. In these small moments, attention stops jumping, the rapid shifting slows, and the natural rhythm of perception begins to re-emerge, a rhythm that includes not only movement but stillness, not only change but pause. And within that rhythm, time begins to feel different, not slower in a measurable sense, but wider, as though each moment has a little more room to exist. There is also something quietly meaningful about this, because in a world that often encourages constant motion, constant input, constant engagement, choosing to remain with a moment, even briefly, is a small shift. A way of stepping out of the rapid flow, not by leaving it entirely, but by creating a pocket of stillness within it. And in that stillness you may begin to notice details that would otherwise pass unnoticed. The subtle texture of a surface, the gentle movement of light, the quiet rhythm of your own breathing. These are not extraordinary things, but when attention rests on them, they become fuller, more vivid, more present. And in that presence, time stretches, just enough to be felt. There is no need to do this all the time. No need to change the pace of your life completely. Even a few moments like this can shift your sense of time, reminding you that it is not entirely fixed, not entirely beyond your experience. It is something that responds, something that opens when given the space to do so. And perhaps this is the quiet gift hidden within the illusion of the stopped clock. Not just a curiosity, not just a trick of perception, but a small doorway, a glimpse into the deeper nature of how time is experienced, a reminder that within the steady ticking of seconds there is room for variation, room for moments to deepen, room for awareness to settle. As you carry this idea with you, gently, without needing to hold onto it too tightly, you may begin to notice small shifts, moments that feel slightly longer, slightly fuller, not because time has changed, but because your experience of it has softened. And in that softness, there is a kind of quiet freedom. Because while you cannot stop the clock, you're not entirely bound by its rhythm either. You live within time, yes, but you also shape how it feels, moment by moment, breath by breath. And as this gentle understanding settles, there is nothing more you need to do, no final step to take. Only the quiet recognition that time is not just something that passes, it is something you experience, something that opens softly whenever you allow yourself to be fully present within it. And so, as we come to the end of this exploration, you may find that the ticking of a clock feels just a little different. Not louder, not slower, but softer, as though each second carries within it the possibility of being felt more deeply. And that possibility is always there, waiting quietly within the moment you're already in.